Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to our 5th webinar on cultural heritage and sustainable development. We gathered in Zoom today on this beautiful day of March to discuss the policy and partnerships coming together to mobilize heritage for sustainable development. The month of March is full of important days, which aim at highlighting the value of our health and well-being, as well as our natural environment, celebrating wildlife, water, and forests. The month starts with Zero Discrimination Day, celebrated annually on the 1st of March, and the awareness on mental and physical well-being is promoted throughout the month with several dedicated days. We are getting closer to the equinox, marking the beginning of spring for the Northern Hemisphere and autumn for the Southern. The same day, 20 March, we will also celebrate the International Day of Happiness, among others. As mentioned earlier, today our focus is policy and partnerships coming together to mobilize heritage for sustainable development. We will talk about the influence of policy documents in harnessing the potential of heritage to support a sustainable development. We will share with you the efforts of ICOMOS and Sustainable Development Working Group in guiding the policymaking processes to achieve this goal. We will also speak about the importance of multi-stakeholder partnerships to share knowledge, technologies, expertise, and resources to protect, conserve, and manage heritage while promoting a sustainable development. We are happy that you could join us today. My name is Miray Hasaltun-Woshinsky, and I am a heritage consultant and the communications officer of Sustainable Development Goals Working Group. Together with Laure Marik, ICOMOS Emerging Professionals Working Group, Multilingual Communications Officer, we will be moderating the questions and answers session in English, French, and Spanish. The presentations will be in English, however, the key points will be shared in the chat box in French and Spanish. Ona Vileikis, Research Fellow at the University College London and representative of the International Scientific Committee on CHIPA, Heritage Documentation to the ICOMOS SDGWG, will be supporting us with Spanish translations. We will have 3 presentations, which will be followed by a questions and answers session. Afterwards, Gabriel Caballero, the ICOMOS focal point on the Sustainable Development Goals, will wrap up the discussions of the day. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers. The first topic of the day will be presented by 5 speakers. Sofia Labadi, Professor in Heritage at University of Kent, Ege Yıldırım, Heritage Planner, Ilaria Rossetti, PhD candidate at University of Antwerp and Arches Research Group, Francesca Giliberto, Postdoctoral Research Fellow at Praxis, University of Leeds and University of Kent, and Linda Shetabi, Heritage Consultant and PhD candidate in Urban Studies, University of Glasgow, will be our first presenters. Our presenters will speak about the policy guidance document, which was produced as a part of the Priority Action Plan of Sustainable Development Goals Working Group. We will hear about the document's aims, key messages, case studies implemented by ICOMOS members integrating multiple sustainable development goals. We will also hear about how the document can be used by various actors in and outside of the heritage field in the future. Our second presentation will be by Roy Kitty. Roy is the coordinator of the Andean Countries Hub under United Nations Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat. His presentation will focus on the role of partnerships to achieve a sustainable urban development at the times of fast-paced urban transformation, poor economic resources, conflict, and several other challenges. Our last speaker today will be Tim Badman. Tim is the director of the World Heritage Program at International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Tim will speak about Panorama Nature Culture Thematic Community, which hosts a repository of case studies of solutions, collects information on management practices, and provides a platform to share experience and build a network. We will hear from Tim how Panorama can contribute to nature culture conservation and sustainable development. Our expert reactor on Facebook today is Olympia Nilio. Olympia is the representative of the International Scientific Committee on the Analysis and Restoration of the Structures of Architectural Heritage to the ICOMOS SDGWG, and professor in Comparative History of Architecture at Hokkaido University, Japan. Olympia will also support us with Spanish translations. Before we start, just a few housekeeping tips. Please mute on your microphones and turn off your videos. For security reasons, please provide your full name and affiliation so we know who you are. We will have a questions and answers session at the end of the presentations, so please send your questions and comments in the chat box. You can ask your questions in English, Spanish, and French. If you would like to address your question to a particular speaker, please do not forget to indicate it in your message. I would like to remind you that we are live on Facebook at the ICOMOS International Facebook page, where our expert reactor, Olympia, is ready to address your questions as well. Last but not least, I would like to thank our webinar coordinating team members, Gabrielle, Linda, Ona, Laure, Nader, as well as Angelique and Celia from ICOMOS Secretariat, Laura and Princess from UN Habitat, Iucn, Nicole, and Maya from Panorama Solutions for all their hard work and support in organizing this webinar. This is our 5th webinar. Throughout this webinar series, we brought together 22 speakers representing various key partners and tackled cultural heritage and sustainable development in relation to each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This is a good opportunity to remind you that our webinars are recorded and uploaded on our YouTube channel. You can find the link in the chat box. Without further ado, I invite our speakers for the first presentation of the day, Heritage and the Sustainable Development Goals, a policy guidance for heritage and development actors. You have the floor.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for having joined us for this final webinar. Next slide, please. So the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals represent some progress in acknowledging the role of culture in sustainable development processes. In particular, Target 11.4, as we all know, explicitly aims to, and I quote, protect the world's cultural and natural heritage under Goal 11 on sustainable cities and communities. And there are several other direct and indirect references to culture and heritage throughout this document. However, it is a firm belief of the team who wrote the policy guidance that we're going to present to you today, that the Sustainable Development Goals fail to acknowledge fully and affirm the importance of heritage as a driver and as enabler of sustainable development. At ICOMOS, we strongly believe that heritage, understood in its broader sense as including cultural and natural heritage, as well as intangible and tangible manifestation, can play a key role in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, not only Sustainable Development Goals 11, but each and every SDG. So while ICOMOS has various documents on heritage for the sustainable development, we thought that the more comprehensive texts explaining how heritage contributing to each and every sustainable development goal was still needed. And this is the reason why we've written policy guidance that we're going to present to you today, and which I believe is being also released today, which is the reason why we're having this webinar today. Another wonderful reason for being in March, to continue what Mireille was saying earlier on. Next slide, please. So the policy guidance, and you have the front page on the screen, is an important step in providing such a comprehensive approach in tackling all of the SDG. It illustrates where heritage can make a positive contribution and be leveraged by all actors in the heritage and development fields to improve policy and practice. However, this document also addresses the challenging points where heritage practices might be at odds with sustainable development objectives, with the awareness that more in-depth studies and debates are called for in the future and in the work of the SDG Working Group. We were indeed guided in our work to draft this policy guidance by the do no harm principle, and we are all well aware that in some cases, heritage practices do harm and they are not aligned with some principle from the Sustainable Development Goals. But as I said, more work is needed on this topic. So let's precisely look at this policy guidance. The aim of this text is twofold. It seeks to address development actors and raise awareness of the potential contribution of heritage to sustainable development processes. On the other hand, it provides guidance, as the name indicates, to ICOMOS members and other professionals at large in adopting a sustainable development perspective in their heritage practices and aligning them to the Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, we, the team, believes that this guidance represents a first attempt to provide a policy framework for all actors, including international organizations, national and local governments, businesses, civil society, and expert organizations, which is potentially suitable for both high-level policy and grassroots implementation. The policy guidance aspires to help build synergies and strengthen advocacy. And I would like to finish with this idea of advocacy. I think this is a fundamental aspect of this policy guidance because so much of what heritage professionals still do focus on a narrow understanding of heritage preservation, conservation, and management only. So the role of this policy guidance, which we are going to release today, is to highlight that heritage is more than just being about conservation and preservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. So I'm taking over this part of the presentation. We are presenting as a team, as was all our drafting effort for the last more than 2 years, our policy guidance team. So this is the section on how the policy guidance was drafted. So this process began at the end of 2018 upon the request of ICOMOS leadership to have a tangible output, as Sophia was saying, a comprehensive guidance document to steer our work in heritage and sustainable development. So this took place during the Buenos Aires Advisory Committee meeting in 2018 December, soon after which we started work by coming together as myself, when I was the SDGs focal point at that time, with Sophia, who was invited to be the task team coordinator for the policy guidance. And soon after, Francesco Giliberto, Ilaria Rossetti, and Linda Shatabi joined us as colleagues who were working intensely on the topic of heritage and sustainability as well. So a concept note began to be developed. And after that, we started to collect inputs from ICOMOS membership through various platforms. Back in the days before COVID, when we could meet face-to-face in person, we took the opportunity of the Marrakesh Advisory Committee meeting and symposium in October 2019 to hold 2 events. One was a knowledge cafe organized by Patricia O'Donnell, Ilaria Rossetti, and myself. And the other one was an experts meeting, which was focused on the SDGs working group plus other participants of the symposium based on an open call. After these in-person meetings, we also launched an online survey for gathering inputs from the SDGs working group members, both on potential case studies to illustrate each SDGs relationship and on key points that they would like to make. I will go to the next slide. And so the work continued after these input gathering sessions when we sat down to actually write the first drafts of the document. The interim drafts were prepared first as a zero draft, which was launched in July 2020 and circulated for online review by the SDGs working group members. This continued until September, after which we incorporated the comments received and circulated for another round around December 2020, which we called Christmas draft at that time to mark the date. And this was also for SDG working group members, but it was also to make sure that all ISCs, our international scientific committees, our national committees, and our working groups were fully included in the process. We launched a call, a targeted invitation to each committee representative, president and secretary general, as our working group is still in the process of completing its full representation by all committees. After gathering these inputs, we have finalized the draft in early 2021. And after the copy editing and graphic layout sessions that have been intensively continuing in the past weeks and even days, we finally have our document uploaded today for you. Thanks to the many contributions we received from 56 individual experts, 13 ISC institutional representations, 20 national committee representations, and a total of 66 ICOMOS members, plus case study contributors who included ICOMOS members and other colleagues in the heritage sector. And here we are with our first edition, which we call as a first edition only, because we see this as a living document which may have future iterations as discussions continue on the topic. We're launching it in English today as an online document, but soon I'm sure our French and Spanish and other language translations will be coming out. They are already being requested, and of course, they're under consideration for us, by us to start as well. But we have actually now ended an era, and we're very happy to have this baby born, as we say, and in the phase 2, all of these further considerations will take place. We try to do this as an inclusive and collective effort as much as possible within the time resources that we had. It must be noted, though, that policy guidance is more streamlined than the standard ICOMOS doctrinal process, which takes significantly longer, several years. Again, in the future iterations, we may also consider to undergo a standard ICOMOS doctrinal process, and these are all to be seen. Thank you very much. I'm handing over the floor to my colleague, Ilaria Rossetti, at this point.
Thank you, Ege. Thank you, everyone. Yes, today I'm responsible to introduce the structure of the document to you. So the document starts with an executive summary, a foreword, and an introduction. It continues with 17 sections, one for each SDG, and includes a baseline, a policy statement, and a case study. While some SDGs might seem more relevant to heritage than others, the approach has been to treat them all consistently, as Sophia and Ege have already explained before, in order to explain all possible linkages between heritage practices and sustainable development. The document concludes with some recommendations for the way forward, a glossary, and a list of references from ICOMOS and other sources. All policy statements that are presented in these documents converge under the main policy directive to harness the power of heritage to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. And they are all grounded in the 5 Ps underlying the 2030 Agenda: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an example of how a specific SDG section looks like. On the left, you can find the baseline, which is composed of two parts. The first one contextualizes the progresses and challenges currently faced in achieving the SDGs, in this case, SDG 16. Next slide, please. The main references used for this section are the United Nations 2019 Sustainable Development Goals report and the UN Knowledge Platform with its tools. Next slide, please. Yes, so the second part of the baseline introduces the threats, potentials, and critical aspects of heritage practices in that wider context. Next slide, please. We built that second part of the baseline starting from the analysis of previously issued ICOMOS doctrinal documents, the exploration of linkages with the SDGs targets and indicators, and eventually we drew from the Task Team 1 academic and professional knowledge, as well as from the knowledge of the SDGs working group at large through multiple meetings and rounds of reviews, as previously mentioned by Ege. Here I would like to thank once more all the fantastic people who worked with us throughout this long journey. Next slide, please. Moving forward, on the right you can find the policy statement, which is directly inspired by the text of the SDGs and supports the harnessing of heritage for sustainable development. It follows a set of specific recommendations for heritage and development actors to integrate and implement the policy statements in their policies and practices. Next slide, please. In developing these recommended actions, we adopted a threefold approach. We looked at the integration of heritage as a positive contributor to sustainable development, at the protection of heritage from harm during development processes, and eventually, but not less importantly, at the improvement of heritage practices for their better alignment with sustainable development objectives. And now I leave the word to my colleague Francesca Giliberto to say something more about case studies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilaria, and hello, everybody. So in addition to what has been said by Ilaria about the structure of the policy guidance, each SDG section includes also a case study that illustrates the interplay of heritage practices with a specific goal, for example, SDG 1, but also with other supporting goals, and in some cases, also with more detailed SDGs targets. You can see, for example, in the slide, at the bottom of this slide, how each case studies can address several SDGs and SDGs targets. Showing the capacity of heritage to support the achievement of each SDGs, but also the case studies show the capacity of heritage to support the achievement of each SDGs, but also to cross-cut across several SDGs, which was one of the key objectives of this policy guidance document. Next slide, please. Okay, so case studies were selected looking at the institutional projects implemented by ICOMOS according to the ICOMOS annual reports, and to the large consultation process with the broader ICOMOS membership previously described by Ege and Ilaria. As a result, the policy guidance document presents one case study for each SDGs, which is considered to be the main SDGs addressed, even if the case studies tackles multiple SDGs at the same time. Okay, so we are already in the next slide. So case studies were implemented by ICOMOS as an institution or by individual ICOMOS members or national and or international scientific committees working in collaboration with other international organizations, such as, for example, UNESCO, FAO, the World Health Organization, the World Bank, and many others, but also with NGOs, universities, local authorities, civil society, and private actors with an interdisciplinary and cross-sectoral approach. To give you an idea about the kind of case studies included in the policy guidance document, we can find on the one hand, among the institutional projects, for example, the case studies of Connecting Practice for SDG 2, or the US ICOMOS International Exchange Program for SDG 4, our Common Dignity Initiative, Right-Based Approaches to Heritage for SDG 10, the Culture Nature Journey for SDG 15, and Heritage on the Edge, Communicating Climate Urgency through Cultural Heritage for SDG 13, and the Climate Heritage Network for SDG 17. Other example of projects implemented by, of case studies implemented by individual ICOMOS members, but of course in partnership with other organizations and institutions and partners. We can find, for example, the case of the rehabilitation of the Medina of Fez for SDG 1, out travel, use of interpretation technology to build a sustainable tourism model for SDG 8, or for example, the Global Sustainable Tourist Council criteria for SDG 12. Our work purposely decided not to focus only on World Heritage properties, but to showcase examples of how heritage in general can be addressed, can be harnessed, to achieve the SDGs. Next slide, please. Okay, as you can see in this example, maybe not very well, but each case study is divided into different parts. So the policy guidance provide for each case studies information about their location, of course, all around the world, the time frame when these case studies were implemented, the people, institution involved, a short project descriptions, and their contribution to multiple SDGs. Next slide, please. And of course, a few pictures to give you a visual idea about how the case studies will look like. Each case study was drafted by ICOMOS members who have actually contributed to their implementation following our overall guidance. I would like to take this occasion to thank all the 28 ICOMOS members who have collaborated with us in the realization of this part of the policy guidance document. Next slide, please. So finally, when selecting the case studies, we paid particular attention to ensure a balanced worldwide geographical representation. 11 projects were implemented in specific locations all around the world, while other 6 projects were implemented on a worldwide level, like, for example, the Culture Nature Journey or the Climate Heritage Network. However, our team is well aware that we could not cover the global geographical and cultural complexity only in the 17 case studies presented in the policy guidance document, which constitutes, as previously mentioned, only the first phase of this work and should be followed by a concrete implementation on the ground and the collection and dissemination of a greater number of case studies. But for this, I will give the floor to Linda, our future Tasking 1 coordinator.
Thank you, Francesca. It's my privilege to be here today, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and to all my friends and colleagues who celebrate Nowruz this weekend, Nowruzatun Pirouz. The second phase of our work will focus on implementation strategies for the policy guidance, putting the policy guidance document into practice. Looking at intersectoral and integrated approaches, we hope to transform the policy recommendations into effective, measurable action. Part of that would be to work with academia, practitioners, ICOMOS, national committees, international scientific committees, and working groups to develop indicators that can help us measure the impact of heritage practices as drivers of sustainable development. As Sophia mentioned, throughout the process of developing the policy guidance document and through all the excellent comments we received, we were acutely aware that heritage in all its forms is not always aligned with sustainable development goals. Addressing this will require, at a first instance, regional and local discussions, and then larger international dialogues. Some contradictions just can't be resolved this generation. After all, we need to leave some difficult tasks for our next generations. But we can start making these discussions more mainstream and remove some of the taboos associated with the inconsistencies and contradictions that we faced. We are also acutely aware that the SDGs themselves are not perfect. So these discussions will have to be flexible and open. Flexibility is one of those tricky words, but we need it to be able to integrate evolving perspectives on sustainable development and heritage to produce policy that's relevant and practical in future iterations of our policy documents. ICOMOS 2017 action plan called for concrete actions and local diversity, adapting the goals to the regional and local contexts, interaction with localities at the level of the citizen, and local decision-making. This is fundamental, and through our ICOMOS committees across the world, we're hoping to be able to address the nuances that just could not be reflected in this first policy guidance document. We're keen to have practitioners develop their own responses, and in working with national committees, international scientific committees, and working groups, shape regional policy in a way that's more relevant and grounded in local context. Through the process, we also learned of some of the excellent work that our members are already doing across the world that address the SDGs, and we're keen to work on developing a better strategy to disseminate these case studies and use them as leverage for more productive strategic partnerships in delivering the SDGs through heritage. By strengthening these partnerships, we're hoping to shore up support for various partners from within and outside the heritage sector and encourage further useful research and studies on heritage and the SDGs. We are currently in discussions with groups and external partners on possible collaborative work. So if you have an idea or a proposal, please do get in touch with myself or Gabriel, and let's just push heritage in front of the SDG train. Thank you very much for joining us, and I pass the stage back on to you, Murray.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophia, Linda, Ilaria, Francesca, and Linda for presenting the outcomes of your efforts. It's very important to underline once more, even though Ege already mentioned, the policy guidance document is the fruit of more than 2 years of interviews, research, and consultation process. Sincere congratulations to our task team on this outstanding document. And good news is that you can now download the document from the ICOMOS website, and the link will be posted in the chat box. Now we continue with our next presentation. I pass the floor to you, Roy.
Thank you so much. Very good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roy Kitty. I'm the coordinator for the Andean countries at UN Habitat, and also responsible for regional alliances here in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, for inviting UN Habitat, and also congratulations for the policy guidance document that I just learned that is going to be a great contribution to the debate. Today, I would like to highlight a few elements of the partnerships, platforms, and initiatives that and approaches that UN Habitat is having vis-a-vis the issue of urban heritage. So I will start right away. Next slide, please. I will start by presenting UN Habitat. As you know, is the United Nations Human Settlements Program, and it was established in 2001 after the Habitat 2 conference, when the member states took the decision and adopted this transformation to a fully fledged program. It's the agency with the mandate on housing and human settlements activities, and in the last 5 years, the mandate itself has been acquiring more importance in the light of the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goal 11, that is about sustainable cities and communities, and the year after that, in 2016, with the adoption of the New Urban Agenda, that is a commitment of member states on key principles and a standard of achievements for actually realizing the objective of the Goal 11, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The next slide, please. Well, as you certainly know, it was a great opportunity to have the incorporation of the Goal 11 among the 17 goals for sustainable development, also because it was found that could be an ideal platform for articulating actions that can not only contribute to the goal itself, but also to a large variety of targets and goals across the 17 SDGs, and also an ideal platform for joint actions and partnerships. So in the space of, in the urban space, in the urban and territorial space, it is thought that different partners can work together and contributing to different goals. And I think that urban heritage is also a similar ground, can be used as a similar ground. In fact, can be thought as a qualitative element that can articulate the social, the economic, and environmental dimensions, and therefore impacting on the key aspects, the key aspects of the SDG 11. So the element of inclusivity, so making possible this dimension of inclusion, safety, resilience, and learning from different culture, and especially when we talk about heritage, we talk about culture that probably were much more conversant to be resilient with their own territory and exert activities that were more sustainable. The next one. So basically, the Goal 11 includes the Target 11.4, that is about strengthening the efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. So the indicator that was identified for this goal was actually very quantitative, and will be measuring the total per capita expenditure on the preservation, protection, and conservation, which of course has its pros and cons, in the sense that is probably something that we can measure quite well. We have the tools to measure it, but certainly is not covering all the impacts that working properly with urban heritage can have on different other aspects. The next slide, please. Yeah, basically, this just before introducing the elements of the new urban agenda that incorporate urban heritage, I would like to recall the preparatory process for Habitat 3, the conference that in 2016 saw the adoption of the new urban agenda. And this was a very inclusive preparatory process that allowed partnerships, alliances to be formed around key thematic issues. And of course, urban heritage was not the exception. And there was a policy paper on socio-cultural urban frameworks. There was an issue paper prepared by different UN agencies with UN Habitat, UNESCO, and others on urban culture and heritage. And also among the various meetings that were organized to gather inputs for the new urban agenda, there were regional and thematic meetings that, of course, incorporated heritage and culture as, especially as a local development asset for cities. And for this theme, I think the conference on intermediate cities that took place in Cuenca, Ecuador, was very, very critical for that. The next one. So as a result of this preparatory process, the member states, in fact, incorporated, among all the other issues, incorporated the heritage and culture in the new urban agenda, and particularly in the first section of the new urban agenda that talks about the transformative commitments, and they are divided in the 3 dimensions. And in this case, the mention on the importance of urban and cultural, natural and cultural heritage was incorporated in the social dimension, as far as sustainable urban development for social inclusion and ending poverty is concerned. The Article 38, in the Article 38, the member states commit to leveraging natural and cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, in cities and human settlements, committing to safeguard and promote cultural sites and infrastructures, and also in strengthening the social participation and exercise of citizenship through the use of urban heritage. They also introduced, adopted the introduction of the urban heritage in the more action-oriented part of the new urban agenda, which is about the effective implementation. And they committed to include culture as a priority component in urban plans and strategies, and also highlighting the need to protect the heritage from disruptive impacts of urban development. And here they also highlighted the need to balance these 2 elements, the protection and the future necessary developments. The next one, I will try to accelerate because I think I don't have much time. So UN Habitat, after the adoption of the new urban agenda, of course, incorporated all these aspects, and in our strategic plan for 2020-2023 for these 4 years, urban heritage is streamlined across the four domains of change that we identified for our actions, and especially the domain of change 1 on reduced spatial inequality and poverty in communities across the urban-rural continuum, strengthen climate action and improve the urban environment, so all the element of resilience and climate change, and also in a new strengthened domain of change at UN Habitat that is currently being strengthened, is the effective urban crisis prevention and response. So how urban heritage can help in a situation of conflicts and the displacements. And partnerships, in fact, is a key performance enabler. So we are actually using partnerships also to ensure that urban heritage is incorporated in our actions in all the 4 domains. The next one. Yeah, as I said, is a cross-cutting team, and actually, especially in domain of change 1, 3, and 4, is where we are working a lot with urban heritage. And after these few slides, I will show you 3 examples for that. The next one, please. Here I wanted to mention the 2 key platforms that we have for partnerships. Are the World Urban Campaign, that is a coalition of partners, of different partners, and in particular, I would like to mention the HPF, the Habitat Professional Forum, and I'm sure that many professionals that are part of the ICOMOS group are also part of the Habitat Professional Forum, and we have been collaborating in that. And then the World Urban Forum as the big conference on housing and urban and sustainable urban development and cities that takes place every 2 years, and where a wide range of partners they gather to review their achievements, to identify challenges, and also to organize new initiatives and new partnerships. And in particular, I would like to highlight the last session that took place in Abu Dhabi just before the beginning of the pandemic, and that was having a strong focus on culture and innovation, and by extent, of course, on urban heritage. The next one. Within the World Urban Campaign, there are initiatives like the Urban Thinkers Campuses that are thematic meetings that take place among groups, different groups of partners, and I just mention one that has been organized on the case of for the Beirut reconstruction. The next one. Another interesting initiative, is the one that UN Habitat is implementing with UCLG and Metropolis. There was a series of thematic sessions on culture and the cultural mobilization in the time of COVID, which provided the preparation of several interesting papers. And of course, I want to mention the recent renewed partnerships between ONU Habitat, UN Habitat, and ICOMOS. So during the last session of the World Urban Forum, a memorandum of understanding was signed among the 2 entities, and the primary objective is to consolidate the partnership, ensuring that the world's cultural heritage is protected, managed, and harnessed for sustainable urban development. Next one, please. Well, here a bit more in details what the 2 organizations are going to work on, and I'm talking about policy inputs on urban heritage, guidelines, legislations, plans and projects, knowledge products, partnerships, initiatives, and then of course working on monitoring and data on heritage management. I would like to conclude with 3 examples of projects that UN Habitat is implementing with different partners, especially local authorities, but also with the partnerships of communities, academias, and professionals and other actors. The first one is the Kizumo Lakefront in Kenya. So we are working on preserving and putting into value the great historical and environmental heritage of this city. Is the next slide, please? yes, in this project we work on through our three-pronged approach on rules and regulations, financial plans, and planning and design. And basically, we are actually the project is providing good solutions on these three key elements, and especially to preserve the Kizumo colonial and natural heritage through the technical advisory to the county government, and in particular to trying to connect the city center to the waterfront, reactivating the area and encouraging the creation of and strengthening of local economies, and while preserving the natural heritage. A second example, the next one, please, is more about resilience, and is an intervention in Wuchang district in China, and is basically an intervention oriented to strengthen climate action and improve the urban environments, and particularly in an area with a very delicate ecosystem that has been affected by rapid urbanization. As you can see in these maps, in 30 years, the area was completely urbanized. So the project aims to recover the resilient equilibrium or balance with nature, creating a network of walkable streets and public spaces, leveraging heritage and culture and nature. The last one is another project in Africa, the Calabe refugee settlements in Turkana, Kenya. This is a very much people-centered heritage conservation approach, and where in the development of the settlement for both refugees and host communities, we considered preserving and integrating the Turkana heritage throughout the project. Here you can see experts that engage with the local community and with the refugees to use technology that are part of the cultural heritage of these communities for the construction of shelters. So I would like to conclude, of course, thanking ICOMOS and all the organizers. I would like to leave just these three messages. So one on the reconciliation of heritage conservation, on the need to reconcile heritage conservation and urban development. So strengthen the positive relation between conservation and the needs of development. Then the aspect of and the importance of heritage to ensure that no one is left behind. As you know, in many cities, urban regeneration in the past and probably in the present, together with heritage conservation, have not had major impacts on poverty reduction, and on the contrary, in some cases, provoked a situation of expulsion of the poor in the regenerated area. And the last message is about learning, no? As we saw in these three sample of projects, how to use heritage through the buildings and urban partners for the development of cities, and using that knowledge to shape new expansions. Also taking advantage of the opportunities that this opens for the economy, for the social inclusion, and for resilience and climate change. So thank you so much, and sorry if I took a bit more than the allocated time. Thanks.
Thank you, Roy. We are almost on time. Thank you for sharing the partnership approaches and project examples from you and habitat, Roy. Now the next presentation is Tim's. I pass the floor to you, Tim.
Thanks, Marae. Let me just firstly check you can see my slides okay.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. Well, look, thanks very much. Thanks so much to ICOMOS, both on behalf of Iucn and on my own behalf for the invitation to join you today, and many congratulations on the policy guidance, which looks brilliant and great to hear about that. It's slightly embarrassing for me to make this presentation as well, because I'm essentially presenting work that some brilliant colleagues have done through the World Heritage Leadership Program, but I think they're all somewhere in the meeting. So let me immediately acknowledge Eugene Joe, Maya Ishizawa, Nicole Franceschini. And I'd also like to add thanks to Marie Fishborn and her team in Panorama, and also all of the people that are providing solutions that I'll mention briefly in this presentation, as well as Norway, that have enabled this work to happen. But with all protocol observed, I will sail onwards. But thanks, team, because this is really your brilliant work that I'm presenting. And if I talk about Panorama, I'm talking about an initiative that is hosted by Iucn, ICROM, and ICOMOS, and the Panorama Nature Culture thematic community is trying to bring together practitioners from across the heritage sector to share experiences of effective management, of inclusive governance, with peers and with the larger community of Panorama, and with a large audience that are interested in conservation and sustainable development. And the goal that I'll be talking about in this presentation is really to foster a nature culture community of practice that's cross-sectoral, that's multidisciplinary, and that works at a global level, but also connects locally. I'll mention World Heritage in a number of times in this presentation, but each time I say that, please let me stress that we see Panorama being a contribution to heritage practice as a whole, and not only limited to World Heritage. The Panorama Nature Culture community addresses some key issues that are found in policy, in research and in practice, and they're typified by implementation of the World Heritage Convention, but I think are more generally some of the issues that we see limiting the effectiveness of the heritage field as a whole. If we focus on the World Heritage Convention, we know this is a unique international legal instrument. It brings together concerns about natural and cultural heritage, but through its 50-year history, it's defined cultural and natural heritage separately in different articles. And in the implementation of the World Heritage Convention, the system itself, the national administrations that relate to it and that support heritage more broadly have followed generally a nature culture divide. But we know that this is a divide that does not exist at the local level. As my dear friend and the colleague of many of us, Nobuko Inaba, has said, culture and nature are split from the top, but not to the bottom. And local communities and Indigenous peoples hold diversities of worldviews where nature and culture as separate entities is just not the norm. And so this disconnect has brought misunderstandings and issues in the application of the World Heritage Convention and heritage practice more generally. And we know specifically that it's the separation of nature and culture is a way to deny access to international conservation policy to Indigenous peoples and to local communities, and conversely bringing nature and culture together creates inclusion and opportunities for local conservation actions to be recognised. And so policy needs to adapt to local realities. It needs to be built with collaboration from the ground up. But there's a need to collect evidence and demonstrate that this separation and these opportunities of bringing nature and culture together are actually working in practice. So the gathering of evidence is another crucial part of what we're doing. In terms of research and practice, the divide is reflected in the disciplinary and sectoral backgrounds of professionals working in heritage conservation. But in order to understand heritage in a more holistic manner, we need to see interdisciplinary and cross-sectoral exchange as not only necessary, but as a new normal. And so Panorama Nature Culture is a way to address some of these issues by documenting nature culture practices happening on the ground, to provide evidence for policy making, and to encourage approaches that are more holistic, to encourage interdisciplinary research, and to encourage encourage and provide the evidence that's needed for heritage to be embedded much more effectively in the larger sustainable development framework. So let me tell you a bit more specifically about what Panorama is. As a whole, Panorama Solutions for a Healthy Planet is a partnership initiative. It was conceived and has been led by Iucn, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the organization I work for, and the German development agency GIZ, but it involves 10 organizations, and it tries to connect the fields of conservation, of development, and of international cooperation in promoting sustainable development through work and experiences on the ground. It has 7 thematic communities, of which we're talking here about the nature culture community, and it's an online platform that documents and promotes examples of inspiring and replicable solutions across a range of conservation and sustainable development topics. And it's a way to enable cross-sectoral learning and inspiration. It allows practitioners to share and reflect on their experiences, increase recognition for successful work, and to learn from peers about how similar challenges have been addressed in other contexts across the globe. And following this Panorama solutioning approach, as it's called, case studies are documented and solutions are put forward using a standard format that identifies replicable building blocks, which are the key success factors, and the context in which the solutions were implemented. And solutions are shared through the online platform, but also through publications and through events and activities associated with Panorama. They're integrated into capacity development activities and workshops, and this methodology for learning and innovation is applicable across topics, across sectors and audiences, supporting the upscaling of successful interventions. And so you can think of it as there being really 2 main users: the solution providers who are documenting and uploading and sharing their work that is reviewed by experts and peers in coming into the portal, but also solution seekers that access these examples of what works, and then can adapt that to their own local contexts. And the solution seekers can also contact solution providers and exchange further information on these examples that are being documented in Panorama. And in this way, a network is created that can share knowledge and generate new ideas based on peer learning. The Panorama Nature Culture Thematic Community was launched in October 2020, and in fact it was launched at the ICOMOS General Assembly marker event for the event that unfortunately couldn't take place in Sydney. And it brings together Iucn with ICOMOS and ICCROM. We're known as the advisory bodies for the World Heritage Convention, but in this context, as in the full breadth of our work as organizations to collaborate together and curate Panorama Nature Culture. And so let me at this point thank ICOMOS for the collaboration that's enabled Panorama to come into place. And this is one tangible manifestation of the culture nature journey that we've been implementing together for a long time now, but for the last 6 or 7 years. The idea then is that this platform, Nature Culture Solutions, showcases examples of heritage places where the interlinkages between natural and cultural heritage are highlighted for generating inclusive governance and effective and integrated management on the ground. The portal is also co-hosting solutions that have come from other thematic communities, such as the ones on protected areas, on marine and coastal conservation, on agriculture, on sustainable urban development, and on resilience, amongst others. And at the moment, in Panorama as a whole, you'll find approaching 300 solutions that can be accessed, but that number we're looking to grow, and you are all part of helping Panorama to grow further. The platform itself has been launched with a new series of 20 curated pilot studies that have been pulled together by the team in the World Heritage Leadership Program, as the people I mentioned at the start of this presentation. And these 20 have come from sites inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. They showcase examples of processes that involve landscape level attention to heritage management and practices that interconnect nature and culture and people, people-centered approaches, and that conserve cultural and natural values. in a series of different examples. So we've seen solutions from diverse places such as the rice terraces of the Philippines, the honey terraces in China, which link indigenous and local knowledge to sustainable conservation. We have cases such as urban agriculture in the city of Bamberg in Germany, traditional landscape management systems in Bushbim in Australia, and other examples such as the shared governance model used in the Cinque Terre coastal landscape in Italy, the traditional management of sacred groves in Kenya and in Japan, and many other examples which I don't have the time to explain today, but where biocultural heritage is being sustained. Let me just emphasize again, though, the portal is not only dedicated to World Heritage properties, but it's absolutely there to be populated by examples of nature and culture interactions beyond the World Heritage system, and not only in places that have international recognition. If you see nature and culture working on the ground in places that you're working in, those are the places we would like to be represented in Panorama Nature Culture. Another development of Panorama through the nature culture community is to apply these filters and tags, which allow every solution to summarize its content and its connections to a series of different ways to think about ecosystems, themes, challenges, and the way in which the solution type helps to fulfill different types of international connections, including the Sustainable Development Goals, the Aichi targets for biodiversity, shortly to be updated in the new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and the Sendai Framework. So this manifests the Sustainable Development Goals up front. And it's interesting to me that one of the outcomes of the nature culture thematic community has been a review of what was missing from the filters and tags in Panorama. So apart from culture being flagged across the whole of Panorama, the importance of local actors has now been increasingly recognized with a new tag, and the degree to which changes in socio-cultural context affect many places has also been added as a new challenge within the Panorama platform. So if I can just summarize some of the things that have come out of this work. So in implementing the Panorama Nature Culture thematic community, we've brought cultural heritage into a platform focused across development and a leading platform for demonstrating and showcasing successful conservation approaches, highlighting the role of culture and heritage in sustainable development and the interlinkages between nature and natural and cultural diversity. A really interesting result is that within the existing solutions already on the Panorama platform, we've been able to identify 240 solutions already published that have a cultural component that was not being acknowledged, and showing that culture and heritage does indeed play a role in sustainable development endeavors much more broadly than when you're just talking about culture. And in fact, culture is hidden, in my experience, in many, many different ways in which conservation is happening, and we need to give it a name and bring it forward. And then, as I've said already, you know, by engaging in culture, we can see that the importance of local communities really comes to the fore. There are some opportunities that I'd like to raise going forward. These include the way that we can really show that conservation practice is not just about sort of theory and broad, you know, kind of broad principles, but it works on the ground, and we can document experience on the ground, and we can document and learn by doing things, and engage with the practitioners who really are at the heart of success for heritage in this world. We can connect practitioners, researchers, and decision takers through this platform, so we have a constituency to talk to about the connection of culture and nature and cultural and natural heritage in a new way. And we can strengthen the exchange between researchers and site managers. And one important additional benefit, not on this slide, is I think Panorama really gives us a way to put World Heritage in the context which it should be, which is not doing World Heritage for its own sake, but seeing World Heritage as an integral contribution to building better cultural and natural heritage practices. There are, though, some significant challenges. So let me just note some of the things we're working on at the moment. So in building the research and practice interface in particular, we need to, as one challenge, build the idea that Panorama Nature Culture can become a database that can also more actively support research, and that can be a resource and learning tool for heritage researchers and practitioners to work together and build build better science. And in that instance, it's important to note that the Panorama review process, whilst thorough, is not classic journal peer review in how it's working. So we accept perspectives and viewpoints from a wide range of different stakeholders, including local communities, beneficiaries, without undue triangulation, for example. And at the moment, we request in the review process at least 2 different points of view, but we don't go through, as I say, a full journal-related peer review process. And so we need to start to look at new tools for reviewing and evaluating and analysing the data produced by Panorama. We need to, I guess, work towards building an evidence base that has examples of completed interventions as well, where there's documentation that adds to Panorama, and that we can build tools to capture more fully what makes a solution replicable. Another challenge is the inclusion of Indigenous and local and traditional knowledge for policy. These processes have been well initiated and increasingly recognised by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the IPCC on climate change, but we still need to, I think, more fully give space for local knowledge and Indigenous knowledge in heritage policy development. A further point is, although Panorama focuses on what works, we can learn a lot from what doesn't work. And so we need to look at the ways in which we learn from things that are not successful examples, but that give us important learning in just the same way that successes do. And perhaps most importantly is just the challenge of engaging partners and practitioners in contributing to Panorama. So to just to overcome the limits there always are in bringing people into a new system. So please join in, but come back on where you see ways in which Panorama could be more accessible, more user-friendly, and particularly if you see limitations in terms of technology or access constraints. So if I can just close with 2 slides. So firstly, as you on this call are part of the solution to Panorama as a whole. There are many, I'm sure, cultural heritage practitioners in the audience, so let me just take this opportunity to invite you to visit Panorama, to explore the inspiring nature culture solutions that is showcasing. But if you would like to share your story, your solution, then please make contact and please feel this is your platform. This is here as a service to all of us, but it will only work if we really make it work for all of us. So please do engage. Lastly, it would just be remiss of me, having concluded with Panorama, not to take a cheeky opportunity that you've given me to note that the Iucn Youth Summit, the biggest, first youth summit that Iucn's hosted, is about to start. And I have a reason to do this because there is a session on nature-culture connections within the Youth Summit program that has come forward from ICOMOS and from the EPWG. Let me thank ICOMOS for also joining that effort through the Iucn Youth Summit. We're approaching 7,000 registered delegates. It's going to be a very big event, but please, if you are an emerging professional and you'd like to connect, please don't miss the opportunity to join us, and you can see the connection here. Mireille, with that, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for presenting us Panorama today. I especially like that it's a community, so it is a bit more flexible to just encourage this exchange and network and learn from each other. Thank you very much. With this presentation, I would like to now move to the questions and answers session. We received a few questions in the chat as well from Facebook, so we will try to ask. I just want to check if Roy is still with us. I think he had to leave earlier, so I will spare his question. First question is from Stefan Pomarada from Zoom. He asks, how does this document complement the Culture 2030 indicators released by UNESCO? This is to our PG group, a policy guidance group. So who would like to receive this question? Sophia, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you very much. There's actually 2 documents by UNESCO with exactly the same title. One is about indicators and one is about case studies. And the case study was released in 2019, I believe. Internally it was called the brochure. I believe that the document that is being referred to by our distinguished colleague is actually the first document, not the indicators. We do not mention indicators in our policy guidance. This is the future step. So I believe it's not relevant to discuss indicators for our policy guidance. So I will refer to the document by UNESCO, which is Culture for the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, a Culture for 2030, I think it's called. And so I think it's complementary. The two publications can be seen, yes, as both complementing each other. I believe our approach was slightly different because we adopted a more comprehensive approach in the sense that we highlight how heritage can contribute to each and every SDG, and that was not done by UNESCO. And UNESCO was very much around case studies. And we have case study, but it's to illustrate the text, which is the context, which is around, you know, how can heritage address each and every SDG. So it's slightly different. I also believe that our case study is slightly longer, so people can understand them a little bit more, how heritage can address SDG, rather than at UNESCO they were a little bit shorter. So this is just the difference. But however, I just wanted to finish by stressing that the two approaches are quite similar in advocating for moving away from considering heritage purely as conservation and management, which is something we still see a lot, to considering heritage as a tool for sustainable development. So very, they are both doing the same thing, but they're also very different in their approach. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Anybody else from the policy guidance team who would like to add? Then we can, I can now pass the floor to Laure to moderate the rest of the questions and answers session.
The next question is for Tim. Thank you, Mireille, for this. So the next question is for Tim. The question is from Gabriel Caballero. It is, what does it mean that culture is hidden in the solutions? Do solution providers not see the site as successful cultural practices?
Thanks, Gabe. I mean, I think Gabe's question gives the answer, which is certainly, I mean, certainly in the world of nature conservation, my sense is that the word culture is not what people are thinking of when they're looking, you know, when they're, you know, actually coming up with ideas about what is working in practice. So it's really, you know, to give a sense that in the world of nature conservation, actually, there is lots of work in the world of nature conservation that is about connections to culture, but it doesn't get called that. And I guess my sense is, you know, both that we quite often find that we're working on similar things, but that we give them different names. And that's one of the things that sort of stops us from connecting. And that's partly an artifact of the, you know, the Western ontology and the fact that too much conservation practice has been developed in too few languages, you know, and especially in, you know, my mother tongue in English. And so that, you know, things just don't call, you know, you don't give it a name. And so I think that's what's Panorama has demonstrated, is that if we apply the lens of culture to what works in practice, we can curate examples where you know, culture and nature is actively being brought together, but there are many more examples where that is what's happening, but we just need to sort of identify that you know, identify how it's happening. So yes, it is about it being present, you know, very broadly, but sort of hidden from view because we don't have culture in the lexicon of nature conservation, I guess, is what's been you know, or adequately in the lexicon of nature conservation, which is what's been limitation. And if you know, culture was not a keyword in Panorama until we brought the nature culture community together, for instance.
Thank you very much. I think we have the time for one last question. It will be for the policy guidance team. It is, how does the ICOMOS plans to address this as making policies is okay, but it is not translated to adequate pressure to the government or ruling people, so that all plans, be it development or others, should include heritage protection?
Can you repeat the question, Laura?
Yes, of course. How does the ICOMOS plans to address this as making policies is okay, but it is not translated to adequate pressure to the government or the ruling people, so that all plans, be it development or others, should include heritage protections? I can add it in the chat box if you want.
I can have a stab at starting to answer, maybe.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
It talked about pressuring decision makers, I believe, the question. Well, first we have some infrastructure. We have the toolkit. Now it's time to use it. And I think if we use it correctly, we can make some headway into that process of putting the right kind of pressure on some processes for decisions to come out in a more culture, heritage, nature friendly way. But I mean, that is part of the implementation strategy, and which is in the works. Partnerships, that's why we're all here together, having the right partners and getting stakeholders to actually communicate and understand what is meant in such a subject, such a document, and actually see how they can use it themselves. So there's a lot of learning processes that need to happen through, implementation activities, workshops or advocacy. We talked about advocacy. So writing such a document is obviously not enough. I mean, it's also how we activate it, how we take it to the audiences, how we make them listen or listen to more audiences ourselves to see how we can communicate more effectively. So absolutely, that's a very necessary kind of activity, and ICOMOS is already engaged in it. I mean, you can see from our interactions with Habitat and long-standing World Heritage processes, and we're still learning. It's a good question, and the answer is it's a long journey, and we're moving forward.
Thank you, Ege. I think Linda wants to add something.
Another little addition to what Ege just said. Sometimes in some contexts where citizens are more empowered to bring about change, heritage provides a platform for citizens to get together, discuss their issues, and come up with solutions. So the policy guidance also provides opportunities for that kind of dialogue to start from a grassroots level to then bring about change at the government level. We can't always look at government for the answers. Sometimes citizens need to get together around an issue and be the change that they want to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm just watching the time. I think we will have to conclude our questions and answers session. Now I would like to give the floor to Gabriel Caballero, the ICOMOS focal point for the Sustainable Development Goals, to just wrap up today's discussion before we say our goodbyes. Gabriel, you have the floor.
Hi, hi Mirai, thank you very much for this. I think to just add on to what Linda said, the policy guidance is a tool, right? If we want to have governments listen to us, we need to have the appropriate tools. And I think this is the starting point to have those kinds of knowledgeable tools that people can use. Before I have 2 or 3 slides to share, and allow me to do that before we end. So thank you very much for everyone. I think for the moment, we have had a lot of discussions. You know, we were discussing about 5 webinars, and this is our 5th webinar, right? Then we started off as our first webinar in looking at SDG 11 and focusing on cities, and then we moved on to economy and prosperity, focusing on tourism and how is COVID part of that that displaces the whole agenda that we've had, and how does tourism recover. We also looked previous webinars. We also looked at the planet and how it can be used for environmental resilience. I think Tim has also added in a couple more ideas to that today. The fourth webinar was about people and peace, and that was really about rights-based approaches and creating a peaceful world. We've had, and the fifth one today is about policy guidance, policy and partnerships. So we are trying to cover a lot of things for the last couple of months. For this webinar, I think it was quite successful. I would like to congratulate again our colleagues who has really been instrumental to the work of the policy guidance document. And we've had engagements to, I've noticed 66 people, aside from our collaborators, and then national committees and ICs have contributed. Thank you very much for that. Roy's perspective on urban sustainability is also quite important. And I think from starting, well, in the next couple of weeks, we will be engaging further with UN Habitat and discovering how we can strengthen our own partnership. I think he has alluded to some focal discussions about climate, about urban resilience, and I think these are good starting points. That heritage is not just looking at the small scale, we are looking also at the macro scale, at settlements and cities. So I do hope that more partnerships of that sort happen. With Tim's presentation, it is also good to know that collaborations happen outside of World Heritage. I know that Dennis has provided some thoughts that why was it about World Heritage in particular, but as Tim said, we need to look at beyond World Heritage and see that there's a lot more to be done. And I was quite surprised, but I know this at the same time that having sometimes people see at the bottom that there's no divide, but at the top it gets divided, and probably because of our own practices, our own PhDs, our own master's degrees that have separated these kinds of fields of knowledge. So if we go back to the basics, that everything is interrelated. And I think that is the purpose of the SDGs. Now, the policy guidance document, sorry, I will just click to the next slide. The policy guidance document, we are now in the next phase of our work as the policy guidance team has provided. And then we are now looking at the decade of action. How do we mobilize everyone everywhere, right? This is, we have 10 years to do this. And I think we need to find local solutions. So the case studies that have been provided, there are 17 of them, but how does heritage form part of the road to recovery and create resilient communities? So we need a lot of people who have their own perspectives, have their own case studies to bring to the table in ICOMOS and in the SDGs working group and in your communities and really put those links together. I think we need to also activate heritage practitioners to think about contributing to a bigger issues of society. You know, SDGs is about the bigger picture. You know, we have a lot of issues to resolve, and I think what Roy was saying earlier about human settlements. You know, we have to look at how we contribute to the city. How do we contribute cultural heritage, contribute to natural heritage protection as well. The other one is relevant indicators. I think Sophia was mentioning about case studies and indicators from UNESCO, but we all know that the SDGs currently, the indicators are not really focused on heritage, but what are the relevant indicators that we can use? Research is quite important. Our peers and the case studies that we've had, baseline data that we've gotten, and transform that to real data on the ground that can be pushed forward and say that heritage is really a driver of sustainable development. And we have 10 years, right? We need to have long-term thinking. I think 10 years is a short time to act. When you think about the life cycles of projects, of monitoring activities, 5 years is a management plan that is usually created. That's 2 cycles. So we have to go beyond those cycles and see we have a lot more things to do in the next 10 years. And then last 2 points, I think there was a point on governments and also how top-down, how we influence governments. That's needed very much so. But we also need the bottom-up approach. So both are intrinsic to the work of heritage and sustainable development. It cannot just be one or the other. Lastly, I think in line with our conversations today, partnerships are quite important. So we've shared with you two of the partnerships that ICOMOS is doing, but I'm sure you've seen our first webinar. We also partner with other collaborators for the Culture 2030 Goal Campaign, and I think there will be a lot more collaborations that will happen for heritage and sustainable development. These are the pictures of all the people that have been involved in the 5 webinars that we've had. There's a lot of conversations that have happened. Everyone is not just a professor or academic. We are all practitioners coming from different parts of the world. We've actually covered all the parts of all the regions, and we've tried to be as inclusive as possible. We've had Arabic translations, Spanish, and today you've had French and English. But I've left 3 boxes there to just indicate that it is not just the people that you see in the webinars, but it is you. It is all of us who are here to provide those solutions, to provide those, to help the journey for heritage to be enable sustainable development. And I think this is a starting point. The policy guidance is a tool, but we have to all contribute to that kind of conversation to make heritage as a part or enabler of sustainable development. Just contact us. I think Mirai will provide this information as well, but do share your thoughts with us, and we're happy to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you all for joining us today, and special thanks to all our speakers for their contributions. Please follow us on social media, and do not hesitate to contact if you have any follow-up questions. I apologize if we had to skip some of the questions, but we had limited time, but right now we are just on time to finalize the webinar. We will keep you posted on our next online events, and we say until next time, have a good afternoon and evening to all. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.